In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Lee Strasberg, the actor studio, and method acting. Hello, theater kids, and welcome back to this series for Theater 5363, Acting in America. This week, we're going to be taking a look at Lee Strasberg, the creator of method acting, and we're also going to be taking a look at the actor studio and how that works. But before we get started, let's get our source on. Our source this week is going to be two different essays from the collection Method Acting Reconsidered, which is edited by David Krasner. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at Salvaging Strasberg by Mark Gordon and The Actor Studio by Doug Mawston. If you're interested in checking out this book for yourself, I'm going to have a link down in the description where you can find it on Amazon and check it out for yourself. But if you're ready, curtain up, let's get started. So this essay opens with the centennial celebration of the Moscow Art Theater, who we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. And this is where Stanislavski and the system originated, and he continued to adapt the system until he died. And it was from the system that Adler, Meisner, and Strasberg all developed their own versions of teaching acting technique. But it's only Strasberg's method that gets a lot of criticism. And this is mainly because Strasberg's method is very close to the original version of the system, which even Stanislavski admitted that it needed to evolve, especially when it came to things like affective memory instead of emotion memory. And we know for sure that when Moscow Art Theater came to America, it changed a lot of things, which we talked about last week. Strasberg was really captivated in the way that each individual role on stage, even if you were just a walk-on part, it was treated as a fully realized character that added to the whole ensemble effect. And it was after MAT left America that Strasberg decided that he was going to take lessons in the system at Boleslavsky's Lab Theater, which we also talked about last week. Stanislavski departed for Russia, and he continued to take the system in a different direction. But Strasberg trained in the system as it was taught by the Lab Theater. And so he became the first American teacher of the system. So when the group theater that we talked about last week first formed, he was put in charge of actor training and directing based on his knowledge of the original Stanislavski system. Strasberg left the group theater in 1937 and he joined the actor studio in the late 1940s. We'll talk a little bit more about the actor studio in just a few minutes. Now, by this point, the system had evolved into something different because Stella Adler, as you remember, had talked to Stanislavski and he gave her some different tips on approaching it from a different way. But Strasberg took the original system that he was taught and he developed it into what he called the method. This became part of the overall acting zeitgeist of the 1950s and 60s. Practitioners of the method were seen as hipster intellectuals and they were outsiders that American culture could identify with. And you can see a lot of this reflected in famous actors of the time such as Marilyn Monroe or James Dean. Now, the first objection to the method was how much emphasis was put on emotion. Actors had to focus on emotion almost to the exclusion of everything else about the character. When Robert Lewis was explaining the difference between the system and the method, he pointed out that the method had a perceived stress on the actor's emotional preoccupation over that of the character. So it was at this point that the actor studio changed technique from the system to the method as former group members started to speak out against Strasberg's deviation from Stanislavski's vision. Stories also started to come out about actors who were using the method suffering mental breakdowns. And this was mainly as a result of all of the emotional memory exercises taking them to places that they weren't prepared to deal with. Meisner even accused Strasberg of claiming to have trained students that he never actually taught. And even after Strasberg's death, Adler was quoted as saying it'll take 100 years before the harm that man has done to the art of acting can be corrected. Now, despite so many critics of the method, it still continues to be taught in acting classes today. Now, despite the controversy, a lot of actors have achieved results through studying the method. However, Strasberg seemed to lose sight of the fact that Stanislavski's system was based on the fact that an actor needs to retain control of his emotions at all time, whereas the method just kind of lets the emotions carry the actor. Adler and Meisner took this system and developed it into something that would work better for American actors, but Strasberg considered his method to be completely universal. Now, thankfully, while the method and other acting techniques are still being taught today, it's not strictly adhered to, and the method continues to affect acting to this day. Mostyn begins this essay by talking about the leadership of the Actors Studio beginning in 1947 with the founders Elia Kazan, Robert Lewis, and Cheryl Crawford. Some of this was as a result of people leaving the group theater. They appointed Lee Strasberg as artistic director from 1949 until his death in 1982. The Actors Studio was founded as a theater workshop for professionals of all ages to develop their craft during long runs of shows or in between jobs, and it allows them to creatively experiment in a controlled environment. It's also a nonprofit organization that dedicates itself to the development of writers, actors, and directors. Membership is obtained by either invitation or by audition. You have to do a 5-minute scene, no monologue. The material has to be contemporary by your age and experience. Once an actor becomes a member, you are a member for life. You have access to all studio facilities, including playing spaces for rehearsals and shows, and an extensive library of materials. The Actors Studio also has a playwriters unit and a directors unit. All the studio work in the acting unit is done on Tuesdays and Fridays, during which members work on any material of their choosing. Actors can write their own material, they can cast their own shows, they can present things rehearsed or unrehearsed, whatever you want to feel like working on. Observing members then give the presenters their feedback. Now, the newest program at the studio is the free theater, in which established theater professionals will perform works that are free for anyone to watch. In the mid-1990s, the Actors Studio partnered with the New School University of New York City to offer a Master of Fine Arts program in theater arts, with James Lipton as the program chair. Now, since then, the program has since developed into the School of Dramatic Arts, with the Actors Studio Drama School as the core curriculum. This program template is based off of the 3 books that Stanislavski wrote. You focus on 1 book for each year of the program. Now, the various disciplines of acting, writing, and directing all work together for the first year. They work separately but parallel to each other the second year, and during the 3rd year, they rejoin in order to create a repertory season. One of the hallmarks of the school is the craft seminar, in which distinguished members of the studio share their tips and tricks and stories with students, which led to the development of the show Inside the Actors Studio, hosted by James Lipton, of which I think I have seen every episode. On Fridays, distinguished members of the studio come to lead workshops with the students to share their processes and their techniques towards acting and directing and writing. And a final perk of being part of the MFA program is that you get to attend closed-door sessions of the studio that are not able to be observed by the general public, which gives them a ground-level look at new shows and experimental performances. So overall, this essay is just a look at the structure and the background of the Actors Studio, giving you a little insight into how it works. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts and impressions on the readings from this week, which I think I enjoyed a little bit more than the readings from last week, to be honest. One of the first things that kind of resonated with me is that I've done studies before on various actors who used the method during the 50s and 60s, how they seem to see themselves as kind of a cut above the normal actors who hadn't received training. And as movie actors kind of have to rely a little more on subtlety than stage actors, I can see how a more thorough psychological profile of a character would be useful in that context. But in a lot of theater scenarios, it could be considered maybe a bit over the top. And despite its popularity, Strasberg and the method have always faced intense criticism since appearing on the scene, and yet it's still here. So that definitely says something for how well it can work for some actors. Another big moment that stood out to me was just the animosity between Strasberg and the former members of the group theater. I knew there was going to be some friction with looking at how the direction that the group took, which was kind of against what Strasberg was wanting to do. We talked a little bit about that last week. So I knew there was some friction there, but I didn't know it was just all-out hostility until I read some of the quotes from Meisner and from Adler. I just didn't know it was to that extent. It just felt like Strasberg was kind of marching to the beat of his own drummer while everybody else was kind of going a different direction. And so I do admire his tenacity, because the fact that we're still here talking about it really does say something about it. Overall, I was really interested in kind of where the animosity towards method acting sort of started. A lot of people use it as a punchline now to try and excuse an actor's poor behavior and their bad choices. And to be able to see that moment where Strasberg split from Stanislavski, he chose not to follow the direction that Meisner and Adler were going. He drew some clear lines as to where acting was going to go in his mind as far as movies and theater were going to go. Every technique that has been developed since then has been successful in its own way, which is why they're still being taught. But now we sort of approach it as a take what you need and leave what you don't kind of way. You don't have to go all in on one type of acting. And that's one thing that feels a little liberating now, as opposed to what a lot of the actors were doing, kind of being chained to one technique or another during that era. Looking at the second essay that was about the actor studio, I've always heard so much about the actor studio, but I was never really clear on how it was set up and how it functioned. I really kind of was interested in hearing how they do the audition process. I had always assumed it was by invitation only, and just to hear what they require as far as an audition was really interesting to me. I know that the free theater has been offered since the 90s, and despite it being around this long, I hadn't really heard much about it, so I found that interesting to read about as well. I'm going to do some more reading and research into that because I find that interesting. I also liked the way that they have the School of Dramatic Arts set up with acting, writing, directing. They're all honing their own craft, but then seeing how it all fits together by creating a repertory season at the end of the program. I would love to see more programs follow this style, because I find that fascinating. So like I said, I've always heard a whole lot about the actor studio. I didn't know the ins and outs of how it was formed and how it ran. So it's nice to see that an institution that started that long ago is still alive and well, and it's still training the next generation of actors. So there you go. Those are the readings for this week and my thoughts on it. Why don't you let me know what you think, and let me know down in the comments below whether you found this informative. Make sure that you stay tuned for the rest of this series. I will have some more videos coming out on acting theory in America. But for now, we will say goodbye and scene.